Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So I want, first of all, thank you for having me and letting me talk. It's daunting, damn you. I want to talk about why tagging matters, which assumes that tagging does matter, which is up for some discussion. It's certainly not clear. Well, tagging matters because it's useful and it's important, and it's useful because somehow it managed to break the old reluctance that we know we humans have to explicitly entering metadata. We just won't do it. But now we're doing it in tagging. And by tagging, I mean the prototypical tagging sites are Flickr and Delicious. Is that okay? Okay. All right. No, Technorati is a broker, not a creator. So that's true. Okay. And Technorati. I almost got through a presentation without using the word Technorati, but Kevin couldn't stand it. Actually, it was Lily. So, okay. So it's useful and it's important. It seems to me, without any data, because I'm just not reality-based, that the reason why we're willing to do that it'd be tagging now and not in the past, when it was called keywording, is that there's social benefit to it. Whether it's direct, I mean, it's a rich melange of what we get out of perceiving our tags as social. Everything from genuine helping the world understand itself better to I get to participate in a community of taggers that makes me feel good about myself, the whole rich thing. It doesn't matter. The social stuff seems to actually be pushing this forward, which I think is just wonderful. So it's really useful. I'm not going to talk about why it's useful anymore. I do want to talk about why it's important. It's not clear to us how important it is because this is very new. It's not clear how far past the early adopters and the technoids it's going to get. Signs are pretty good that it is going to get past the early adopters, but we don't know. So if it is important, I think that one of the reason I care about it being important is that we've had a view of knowledge for 2,500 years that tagging upsets. Knowledge has been, we've assumed that the shape of knowledge is a tree. We've assumed this at least since Aristotle, who made it explicit, but he was just making explicit what everybody knew anyway. That knowledge comes in nice trees, taxonomic trees. And trees are fantastic, efficient mechanisms for understanding large, complex things like universes. So we're never going to give up on trees entirely. But trees, we get to trees through, remember, these are trees of ideas, but yet somehow we get to them by the same mechanism by which we organize physical things in the world, by lumping and splitting. So how do you get a tree? You start out with some collection of miscellaneous stuff, and you divide it into, let's say, 2 or more, but make it simple, into 2 piles. Or if it's laundry, you divide it into as many piles as you have people in your family. And so you take this lump and you split it, and then you take each of the new lumps, which is your son's laundry, and you split that basically into body parts, into pants and socks and shirts and the rest of it. And then maybe you take the shirts and that new lump and you split that. So you end up with a tree by doing this basic act of lumping and splitting, which is a real world activity. And somehow, for 2,500 years, we've assumed knowledge is a tree. The shape of knowledge has been limited by the limitations of the real world. Right? It's lumping and splitting as if ideas were like laundry. It turns out that they're not entirely like that. And trees become knowledge by being assumed that there is the tree. The tree is knowledge. The rest of them are just trees. But if you can come up with a tree that has special significance, that is the tree, now you're talking knowledge. And the people who get to build and maintain and initially establish this tree are in positions of authority, which is fine. They get to this authority through expertise. It's not that Mussolini has put them in power. It's that they have advanced through the academic disciplines or whatever, and now they are. So we get trees that we get knowledge that's based on trees, trees that are based on this real world fundamental act of lumping and splitting, of organizing the real world, and by giving special precedence to some trees and to some of the people who maintain these trees. So now, obviously, we're not in a world in which all that matters is the physical. Right? We're digitizing everything. I tend to think of this as being a third order of order. The first one being when you organize the stuff itself, like the books on the shelf. Second is when you separate the metadata and you organize that, books in a catalog, card catalog. And the third is when everything's digital. And with the principles for organizing the first two just don't really apply anymore. For example, when you're doing real-world lumping and splitting, or if you're Aristotle constructing a tree of knowledge, you can only put one thing, you can only put a thing on one branch at a time. If it goes here, that's where it goes. If you're arranging real objects, this is a real-world limitation. It's based on this real-world limitation that if you're lumping and splitting real-world socks, laundry, and you come to the pair of socks, got to go in one pile or another, it can't go in both. It's just the way the real world works, and we've absorbed this limitation into our knowledge structure. Digitally, of course, we don't. Digitally, we want to put everything we put online, whether it's a commerce site or an information site, we want to put it into as many categories as we possibly can, as many branches, because it makes it easy for people to find it. It's totally to our advantage to do that. It doesn't occupy space, why not do it? I mean, basically, it's free. Which means that there doesn't have to be the tree anymore. It would be foolish to have only the tree. I mean, there are environments where it's not foolish. Let me be a little careful. But in many, many, many environments, it would just be foolish to say, here's the way it's organized, and you will follow my path because we know better for some reason. No, much better, it turns out, digitally, now that we can do it, to let people construct their own trees dynamically. So there isn't any such thing as the tree. The trees are tied to projects. That is, I need to search this way because this is what I'm trying to do now. Same body of data, same person, next minute, but now I'm trying to do this other project, so I'm going to go through it this way. It's just totally project-based, can even be personality-based. So there's a third difference as well. There's some others, but the third difference, in addition to sort of multi-inheritance, a leaf on many branches, and no single tree having preference, is that in the physical world, in the first two orders, we really like things to be neat. There's an enormous price to be paid for having messy organizations. People get lost. Whereas digitally, the messier the better. I mean, messiness is entropy in the real world, but digitally it's the source of creativity, it's the source of energy. So as messy, as many links with as many different meanings, use that rel tag as much as you can, the better. The richer the set, the smarter the group. So, let me talk briefly about tagging, which seems to me to be, especially for early adopters, to be this almost conscious slap in the face to the semantic web, or to controlled vocabularies, or ontologies, or any group, or librarians. I mean, Lord love librarians, but any group that thinks that the only and right way to organize knowledge is to have authorities establish the best tree, or a semantic web that we're going to figure out what the right categories are and what the right metadata is. Along comes tagging and says, oh, forget it, old man. We're just going to go ahead and tag it ourselves. I'm not going to wait around for you to figure this out because you'll never get it right. There's no possibility of getting it right, by the way, because there isn't any one single tree or taxonomy or way of understanding the world. But we're just going to go ahead and do it. And we'll figure it out later, which I think is, in fact, the fundamental new architecture that's emerging all over the place. Part one of it is that instead of building trees, you shake the trees, you let the leaves form a pile. You embrace the miscellaneous. The miscellaneous is no longer what didn't work in your organizational scheme. The miscellaneous is where knowledge starts. It's how you begin. You build this big pile of objects. You enrich them with as much metadata as you can. You allow your users to enrich them with as much metadata as they can, especially that. You hook it up to other piles. This is a distributed metadata system, so why not? And you have these objects that are so rich with metadata that they can be found by anybody, whatever their purpose is. So you move to the miscellaneous, and then you do two things. You include and you postpone. And by include, I just mean somebody wants to tag it this way, thinks about it this way, why not? They want to misspell it? Okay. You can find, why not? It's just bits. So include everything you can, and postpone for as long as you can the moment when you actually start classifying or categorizing, and preferably postpone it to the point that your users are doing it, not you. Right? That's the best thing, if your users are able to sort and taxonomize dynamically. So include and postpone, which I think is often good advice for a particular collection of data, but I think is also sort of fractally what's going on with tagging, which is we don't know what we're going to do with this stuff. But we're going to tag everything we can find, and wait for somebody to figure out how to make really good use of it. And there's already some good uses of it, but we're tagging into the future. We're tagging, thinking about this stuff. Yeah, we can use it at Flickr, and we can use it at Delicious and that other place. And that's great, but I think many of us suspect that this is important because it's going to be much bigger than those three uses, much bigger than any particular use. So we're doing it and sort of postponing the moment when we figure out what to do with it, which is exactly the opposite impulse of a certain class of information architects, certain class of library scientists, and semantic web ontologists. So very briefly, there are sets of problems many of you are far more aware of than I am. I'm going to point to two of them. First is a scaling issue, namely that when we tag stuff, we're using language. That's the scaling issue, is language. And language is necessarily and gloriously ambiguous. That's where it gets its meaning from. So inevitably, we're going to be tagging stuff with tags that mean things to different people, which is fantastic. But it's also an issue if you're a computer. So precision and recall sorts of things. I tag, am I going to find everything that's about London? Well, no, because I'm going to miss the ones that aren't tagged London, but are tagged double-decker bus. But that's okay. In an environment of abundance, that's okay. I don't have to get everything. And I will get, when I look for London, Jack London and London, Ontario, which I may not want. So those are issues. That's the first one, the ambiguity that arises when you're scaling. And the second is that we are, I think, now tagging for three sets of people. We tag for ourselves, so we can find it. We tag for our group, the people that we anticipate will be looking at the same set of stuff. So if you're doing SCS 2005, in your mind somewhere you're thinking, there's some body of people, some of whom you know, some of whom you don't, but have shared the interests that you do in this conference, and so you're tagging it with them in mind as well. And that's a type of social group, ill-defined. And the third is we're tagging, we know that these things are going to have life beyond us and our group. So sort of three things: me, the set of localities, and then globally. The problem is that you want to use different tags for each of those things quite often. And we haven't, so you have to figure out now we don't have the norms for doing this. We don't know exactly how we should be doing this, because nobody's figured it out. There isn't a convention around it. But we will figure it out. So I think the solutions to these two problems come along two axes. One is we'll automate better, and our computers will get better at judging context, in part because they'll know more about our social context, or about our social network, which is obviously a hugely powerful tool for disambiguating language. And the second axis is we will also figure out something I have no idea about yet, which is how comfortable are we going to be tagging? That is, it turns out many of us are fine tagging into a single field. Are we going to get so used to it? Are those kids or their successors in 5 years, are they going to be so used to it that they'll think nothing of filling out 2 or 3 or 4 fields? Have special fields attached to data. And so we're back at property sheets for metadata, the way we always thought we would never succeed. I don't know what's going to happen. Will namespaces and other sorts of conventions arise so that we can disambiguate? We have to invent all this stuff, and it's not clear to me how willing we are going to be to become very, very explicit in how we tag. Some set of us will type in a couple of words. Are we going to get ourselves used to tagging more explicitly with those 3 different groups in mind, a special field for place or whatever? I don't know. But we'll figure it out. I mean, we'll figure it out. It's emergent, so I don't know how anybody can tell. So overall, here's why I'm excited beyond irrationally exuberant about tagging. Because here we are, and we're creating this new infrastructure on top of the net. That's an infrastructure of human meaning. And it's incredibly messy, and it's tied to individuals who are doing the meaning thing with language, which is using language in ways that's meaningful to them, that they anticipate others will like them, will understand, and even in ways that strangers they've never met will understand. That's a rich set of metadata. That's not a controlled vocabulary. That's breaking through the controlled vocabulary all the way to all the ways that humans use language, from descriptive to metaphorical to prescriptive. It's an amazingly rich set of data we're finding, and we're going to figure out how to use it. Stuff will emerge. There will be companies like that one that will figure out, oh, here's this rich set of data, metadata, that's generated by humans. what can we do with it? And it's just really exciting to think about all the things that we can't think of yet that will do it. And as we do this, I think ultimately knowledge is finding its natural shape. It's been in this unnatural shape maintained by the scarcity of atoms, the fact that there are 32 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica and 65,000 entries, whereas you go on Wikipedia and in 4 years they've got over 500,000 articles already just in English. Smaller topics, many more of them. Knowledge is finding its natural shape now that it's being freed from the physical. And I think it's really at least interesting and actually really exciting. Thanks. Oh, questions? We do have time for questions or we don't? Okay. No, I can't talk any faster.
Here's a question. It seems like historically there's been a cycle back and forth from one extreme to the other. And I'm viewing this in the context of information retrieval and indexing that's gone back and forth between explicitly putting in some form of metadata and then the technology getting to the point where we decided that human interest and ability to put in metadata is outstripped by automatic ability to figure out what's there in the first place. And we've gone back and forth on the web with this, where people put tags in their pages so the search engines could find them. Then we discovered people put lousy tags so the search engines would be misled, and the search engines went and looked at links in other places. Why, if you believe this is going to be different and is going to last, why is this not just another wave back and forth that will be replaced by doing a better job looking at the content and the context where that content is being viewed?
But for a simple reason, which is, and this sort of, it gets Hegelian right at this point, right? It's been oscillating back and forth because it would be good medicine to insert metadata, but no human being likes to do that, and so we keep failing at it. You know, SGML and Google and metadata tags and the rest of it. The thing that really breaks us out of it now is that authors don't tag, readers tag. That's the first huge difference. No? Oh, okay. And the second is the social dimension of it as well that I talked about. I think it's actually close to funny. I think it's spectacular that the tags that authors create for their own works have no special priority, just another tag. So the postmodernists were 100% right. The author does not own her work, does not own the meaning of her work. The readers do. So put that together with the social nature of it, and people being able to do something beyond themselves, which is, I believe, part of our nature, and you break out of that tension. Maybe. Are you pointing at Mitch, or are you?
I'm raising my hand, but
Oh.
you go first.
Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I have a couple of points. One is to talk about this history of trees and being going back so far. Sure, Aristotle tried to do something like that, but it's not such a clear path. I mean, that is really coming out of science and scientific taxonomies where it has a place because you need a type of organization. And librarians for the same reason. But I mean, if you just go back as far as Kuhn, talking about the 1600s, 1700s, it's not until the 1800s that you get this kind of encyclopedic tagging. So I wouldn't say that it's such a long history. And then you mentioned postmodernism. You've got all this phenomenology that doesn't depend on tagging at all. It talks about languages contained within social groups, defined within social groups, etc. And then item number 3 is that there already is software that can be tag independent and completely look for context and match things really very well. That's Bayesian. So, I mean, the future of tagging to me is like, it's not something I want to do. It's not something I see those high school students doing. So I'm not sure how far there is to go down the tagging road.
Okay.
I'd like you to clarify your position.
Okay, so on the first point, the path from Aristotle to the natural sciences is almost direct. And so I disagree with you. I think it actually is Aristotle who first made it explicit. It was Porphyry, 5th century AD Syrian philosopher who noticed, working with Aristotle, said, oh, you know what? This actually can be drawn as a tree. Aristotle never actually, in the sand in the Agora, said, oh, branches, tree-like. But the line between Aristotle's categories and sciences, and Linnaeus, who modeled himself on Aristotle, is direct.
They didn't have a common tree at one time.
Okay, we will take this offline. Second of all, one of the really interesting things, so one of the most, you have the phenomenologists who have a very rich view of language. Language is the context. We've had way too many years of analytic thought, including in software engineering, that has assumed that language is a type of code, that it's a series of meaningless symbols that get attached to the world, and in that sense are basically context-free. It's a one-to-one relationship. One of the really interesting things about tagging, from my point of view, is that I think it's going to validate the phenomenologist's view of language, because it can't be understood as in a simple mapping, as a simple code. So maybe we'll get past the point, I hope, where we think of language as simply a code that can be broken. It can't be. And third of all, the clustering software that you have is tremendous, and will be of a special use when applied into this phenomenological world in which we're dealing with genuinely rich, human-generated, genuinely ambiguous tags that can't be resolved to something unambiguous without stripping them of their meaning. So the phenomenologists were right also.
Good response.
Thank you. Mitch.
So David, what I'm concerned about with tagging is that there's this sense that if we just tag, goodness will emerge. And what I would like to know is how you think tagging will actually make us more deliberative about the meaning of the information we're sharing.
Well, I mean, you put your finger right on the right on it, because on the one hand, what you want to say is anything that requires us, I want to say, anything that requires us to be more deliberative is going to fail. We're not going to do it if we actually have to ponder and think, what would the French philosophers, how would they have tagged this? If it's not really simple, almost instinctive, and have some personal use. So that's on the one side. And on the other side, you have the hope, my point of view, it's a hopeful thing, to have people actually getting more reflective and thinking. I just take delicious. I've just found an interesting site on the web. Who else would benefit from this? How can I help them benefit from it? And have to therefore think about what I'm going to tag it. Do I tag it taxonomy? Do I tag it, that's a type of deliberative thinking that's a thinking about, that necessarily recognizes that other people use language differently and you need to be careful about it, so it's a writing exercise, and it necessarily brings in other people's point of view. Sorry.
But to the point about the scientific method, the scientific method presumes that we're going to state a thesis and we're going to test a living heck out of it until it either breaks or simply survives over time. In tagging, we say, well, look, I don't agree that it means the same thing as Bob does, and so I'm going to tag it differently. And we never actually put these taxonomies into the crucible of real knowledge.
Well, we do to some extent, in that the problem is measuring it. So tagging something London versus UK versus double-decker buses, there is some measure which maybe those folks can help figure out, or other tag brokers can figure out, which one is more likely to get your stuff called up by people who are trying to find pictures of London. There is something objectively true about that, and it can do it by social group as well, that among Americans, London works, and among French, something else works. The science of it is we don't yet know, and it's also really not clear once we do know. Let me change this. Once we do know, it seems to me unlikely there's going to be a direct relationship between the science that says, here's the right set of controlled terms to use if you want to get your stuff to be found, as opposed to groups of people who find whatever immediate phenomenological enjoyment out of the fact that they tag something successfully, where they will define what successful means, which may mean simply that the 5 people around them also found it. That, I'm going to guess, is going to be a more effective way for folksonomies to emerge than to have a board that says today's most popular term for this type of thing is X, Y, and Z. I could be totally wrong. But I'm only guessing this because it seems to me that the sociality of tagging is the one thing that differentiates this from previous attempts at tagging, and so maybe that will.
I have a question. Can I go now?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.